treasure trove of lessons. We do. Our first lesson has Amos, that country bumpkin of a prophet who was at home taking care of the sheep and taking care of the sycamore trees. Their sycamore trees and ours are different. Our sycamore trees are shade trees. Their sycamore trees are fig trees and fruit, so you have to tend them in order for them to produce figs. Anyhow, Amos was a farmer. He was. And God calls him and sends him from the south in Tekoa all the way up to the north, to the northern kingdom of Israel, to confront the leadership of his people who were dishonest. They were making the ephah small and the shekel great. The ephah was like a bushel basket. So they shrank the containers that they would sell you the grain in, and then they made the shekel, the money you had to pay them, even more. Those of us who have opened a can of tomatoes and discovered that it only has 14 ounces now instead of 16, or a can of beans that are 15 ounces instead of 16, or a box of Triscuits, and the box is big, but the bag inside is tiny, or, the box of cereal. When you open up a great big box of cereal and there's like 3 inches in the bottom of the box, you know how that works. We understand what riles Amos up so much. So that would have been a good sermon. Then we have the letter from to the Colossians, where Paul describes Jesus as the image of the invisible God. The word that he uses for image is icon. So Jesus isn't just a picture of the invisible God. An icon is kind of like a window where you are supposed to look at the icon and meditate on the icon and bring yourself through the icon into the realm of the world that lies beyond. So Jesus is that kind of image of the invisible God. Jesus is the thing that allows us to look through Jesus and take ourselves into the world of heaven, into the kingdom of heaven. So that would have been a great sermon, but you're not getting that. You are getting Mary and Martha. If you remember last week, we had the best known of all of Jesus' parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan, where a lawyer comes up to Jesus and asks, "Teacher, who do I have a responsibility to be a neighbor to?" And Jesus uses his parable to turn that question around, to ask, who do I need to be my neighbor? He turns the whole thing on its head. You remember the unlikely hero is the Samaritan who stops and takes care of the man who fell among thieves. And at the end of the parable, Jesus tells us to go and do likewise. He has the Samaritan as the hero, the Samaritans were the enemy of Israel. So he has them be the hero and tells all the Jewish people, act like a Samaritan. Whoa. That was a controversial thing to do. That would have gotten a rise out of a lot of people in his audience. Well, today we have Jesus doing some more upside down things. He goes to visit Mary and Martha of Bethany. We know they live in Bethany because John tells us that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived in Bethany. But poor Luke, Luke is the Gentile physician who isn't from around there. He doesn't know anything about Clover or any of the surrounding towns or anything. And so, bless his heart, he can't help it. He just says, they come to a certain village. Everybody knows it's Bethany except Luke, but poor Luke is just not on that. After all, he's a physician, not a Palestinian geography person. Well, our lesson follows immediately after the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in today's lesson, we have a very unusual thing. We have Martha welcoming Jesus into, notice, it's her home. Today, we don't think all that much about that, but that would be so unusual in Jesus' day. Women didn't own homes. It was never Martha's home. You know, you would expect it to say Martha welcomed Jesus into Lazarus' home, but Lazarus was her brother, and even though Mary, Martha, and Lazarus all lived together, it was Martha's house. She was unusual. Either Martha was wealthy on her own, either she had never been married, or maybe she was widowed and had this home. But it was so unusual for women to own a home there, and her sister Mary was there also. But Mary, we're told, sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying, while Martha did all the work to show hospitality. Martha was the Martha Stewart of her day, who was the good hostess, busy welcoming her honored guest rabbi, the traditional role for a woman to take there. Notice some other things. At that time, a rabbi would never enter a woman's house and teach women. It was an unheard of thing. Rabbis were supposed to go into men's houses and teach men, not women. So once again, Jesus is breaking the rules. He has walked across the line. Not a traditional thing to do at all. He was teaching women who simply were not to be taught by rabbis in those days. And Mary was taking advantage of this fact. Sitting at the Master's feet was a place where disciples sat to hear their rabbis teach. So Mary is the revolutionary here. She is ready to take on the role of a disciple. Remember, rabbis didn't have women disciples, so Jesus and Mary are kind of plotting together, you know, to do something clearly against the rules. How about them apples? Here might be the first instance of a woman disciple, just like the 12 who became the first bishops of the church. Had she lived in a different time, Martha's sister Mary might have been the first woman bishop in our church, or apostle. How that went on. So, Luke tells us that Martha, instead of going, go get him, Mary, you know, instead of doing that, Martha was distracted by her traditional duties. The word distracted is thorobazo in Greek, and it means troubled or bothered or distracted, to be set in an uproar, to be stirred up, confused, to be worried. According to my friend Charles Joy, it means to have your mind going in 100 different directions all at once, you know? And many tasks in Greek is literally what it says in the Bible is much service. She was distracted by too much service. Martha was being too much of a hostess. She was doing it all. You know, this seems to me, in my life, this week, this past week, exactly who I am in the moment. I'm Martha. In the past week, starting a week ago yesterday, I drove to Asheville to see my sister in the nursing home, you know, to bring her the stuff the nursing home doesn't have. Fresh fruit. You know, you would think a nursing home would have fresh fruit, but all their fruit is little tubs of applesauce and little tubs of fruit cocktails and little tubs of stuff that may not be all that much like fruit, you know? That's what the people in nursing homes get. So I bring her fresh fruit, I bring her canned ginger ale, I bring her low sodium, and sometimes I can even find no salt potato chips. Those are miracles. I find her these little blueberry muffins in the passage, and I always stop by a restaurant and get lunch, so she's not eating the very unappetizing food that you get in the nursing home. So I did that on Saturday. I drove to Asheville and did that. Then last Sunday after church, I climbed in the car and drove 400 miles to Cape Charles, Virginia, on the eastern shore of Virginia. And to see my other sister, I prepared and got her to sign her quarterly 941 tax return for her caregiver who helps her all the time. I went down to the zoning office to get permission to do the repairs on the house that we're working on. I drove her car to make sure the battery doesn't die because she doesn't drive anymore. But the car is psychological. It tells her she's still independent, you know. whether she drives or not. So that's the purpose of the car. And then I helped her pay a bill that she had forgotten to pay. Okay. Then I came home on Tuesday, another 400 miles, and on Wednesday morning, I drove my beloved spouse to Raleigh and back for a meeting that he had that day. Then Thursday and Friday were at church. Yesterday we had Charlie Lesky's funeral, and I can hear Jesus say to me now, Martha, Martha, Ed, Ed. Your mind is going in 100 different directions right now. Stop it. You only need to worry about one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Think about that for a minute. Mary has the chance to be the first woman disciple. Martha passes that chance up, but Mary does not miss the opportunity to sit at Jesus' feet and talk with her Savior. How many of us in this room would give anything in the world to have that opportunity? You know, just to sit and be with Jesus and touch his garment hem, as the old hymn says, you know. How many of us would love to see Jesus in the flesh, to hear him teach, to be in his physical presence? Mary is ready to break new ground as the first woman disciple, and Martha is doing the dishes. You know, think about that. Here was Martha's chance to change history too, to break out of her customary role and explore new territory for women. And she blew it. She was too consumed with her traditional roles of hospitality. She was so consumed with doing good things for her special guest that she missed the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm just like Martha. You know, if I'd been there, I'd been busy cooking supper, cleaning the house, and making sure people had something to eat and drink, and missed my chance to be a disciple, to sit at Jesus' feet and hear him teach, to touch him and see him in the flesh. Like Martha, I would have blown it too. I would have missed the opportunity to do what millions of people wish they had the chance to do. So, Jesus would say to me, Ed, Ed. Notice that he uses the name twice as a gentle chide, like, poor old baby, poor thing. You're worried and your mind is going in 100 directions. Mary's chosen the better part. I get so busy doing things sometimes that I get caught up in the doing and forget that we are human beings instead of human doings. The reason for doing of all these things is good. I mean, the reason is good. The reason that we do all the stuff we do is to love the Lord our God with all our heart and soul and strength and mind, and our neighbors as ourselves. They're all good reasons. So today's lesson that strikes me is sort of the illustrated completion of the Good Samaritan last week. If we're too much like Mary, the man who fell among thieves would have never been found and never been helped, because we'd all be back at the temple regaling ourselves in the glory of God. And if you're too much like Martha and Ed, then we might lose focus on what's really important. So instead of taking these two women, Mary and Martha, each by themselves, and having to choose which one of them we are, I think maybe a better thing would be to take them together as a polarity to be managed, to be dealt with, to do all such good works as God prepared for us to walk in, like the Good Samaritan, but also to pull back from all those works, sit ourselves down and focus on listening to what God has to teach us. It reminds me of what Professor Ron Heifetz of Harvard University says, and you might have learned this in business classes instead of church, because he's a business person and he writes about leadership. but it applies just as much to us in here as it does to leadership in the world. He writes, let's say you're dancing in a big ballroom. Most of your attention focuses on your dance partner, and you reserve whatever is left to make sure you don't collide with the dancers nearby. When someone asks you later about the dance, you exclaim, oh, the band played great and the place surged with dancers. Heifetz continues, but if you had taken the time to go up on the balcony and look down at the dance floor, you might have seen a different picture. You would have noticed all sorts of patterns. You might have noticed that when slow music played, only certain people danced, and when fast music plays, others stepped onto the floor, and some people never got onto the floor, but stayed clustered in the corner, as far away from the band as possible. You might have reported that participation was sporadic, the band played too loud, and you chose only to dance to fast music. Heifetz continues, the only way you can gain both a clearer view of the reality and some perspective on the bigger picture is by distancing yourself from the fray. If you want to change what is happening, you have to go out on the dance floor. So you need to be both among the dancers and up on the balcony observing. That's where the magic is, going back and forth between the dance and observing, and using one to inform the other. Pretty smart guy, huh? Like all of life, activity and passivity is a balancing act. One thing is not good and the other thing is not bad. Instead, it's a polarity of activity and reflection that we have to balance our lives with. So take that lesson from Mary and Martha. Amen.
Let us stand and reaffirm our faith using the words of the Nicene Creed, which is found